What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you a video that is admittedly a little more of a bummer than the stuff I usually like to make, but I do think it's important that we talk about it. Although I will say, right after Spiders closed, which was part of everything going on with Nacon that we're about to talk about, a lot of people were asking me to make a video about that, and I just really didn't have anything to say beyond Spiders was closing, which wasn't a super helpful statement, so I was holding off. And yet, not even a day or two after we learned that Spiders, the studio, was closing, Nacon put out its big announcement of the new date for Nacon Connect, which is a little suspect given that, again, Nacon is insolvent and actively having to restructure its businesses at the moment, which makes everything that will be announced at this show, again, suspect, which is the main thing I want to talk about here. But before we get into all that, let's first talk about the stuff with Spiders. So I do want to start this off by mentioning that Spiders was a developer that employed, I believe, around 70 or so people, and those are real people that were affected by this, that have to go out and look for new jobs and everything, and I sincerely hope they land on their feet. I think it's a little too easy to forget that when we talk about some of these things, so I wanted to lead with it. That said, Spiders officially closed on April 29th, which was not a big surprise, really. We got the news on the 28th, they put out a message on the 29th, roughly 6 weeks after they had launched Greedfall: The Dying World, the sequel to Greedfall, which itself was a couple of weeks after we had gotten the news that their owner, Nacon, had filed for insolvency due to a problem with Nacon's owner, Big Ben, not being able to pay back a debt due to some banking issues, which led to this sort of cascading effect. Spiders, in particular, I think got caught in a particularly unfair situation, given that the announcement of Nacon's insolvency and stuff happened right before Greedfall: The Dying World release, which is obviously going to affect sales. I had to mention in my own review that I would probably normally give it a buy on sale, but due to everything with Nacon, I couldn't recommend it because it almost certainly wasn't going to get post-launch support, which it obviously isn't now. Though Nacon is supposed to be stepping in to release a DLC quest in a week or two, but even then that quest is supposed to be a singular quest, and I doubt they'll even follow up on that afterwards. So Greedfall 2 is a buggy experience right now, and it's unlikely to change, obviously. And all of that was just the case before the union that worked with Spiders and everything put out a big statement calling on the leadership of Spiders and Nacon to have, of course, put the people working there in this position due to their shoddy management, which was, again, what their statement said, though it's certainly kind of hard to argue against that when obviously all this stuff is going on. I have played quite a few of Spiders games over the years, not all of them, mind you, but quite a few. And it's really disappointing to see them being closed after 18 years in the industry. They were a studio that kind of always seemed to be on the cusp of breaking into AAA, but never quite getting there. And yet, many of their AA titles were really memorable and interesting in their own ways, like Greedfall, which was their biggest seller. I personally was a huge fan of their Technomancer title, and a lot of other people obviously didn't take that news super well. And so Nacon's decision, almost immediately after this, by which I mean literally the next day, to announce Nacon Connect returning after the initial announcements of all the insolvency and problems, it was initially delayed and was rescheduled. So on April 30th, after Spiders had closed, they announced their Nacon Connect happening on May 7th in just a couple of days. Now, the point of Nacon Connect is to, of course, highlight the games they are both developing and publishing. However, this obviously creates a bit of a problem because I don't understand how anybody is supposed to take anything in that showcase seriously or without a hefty grain of salt because of the financial situation that Nacon is currently in. Several of their studios have filed for insolvency. Spiders was one of them, which is also just straight up closed now, but other ones like Cyanide have also had to file for insolvency, which basically means they have currently their liabilities frozen while they continue to figure out a way to restructure the debt in a way that allows them to continue to do business. But given how studios that they own are already closing and insolvent, again, how much any of this happens is up for debate, and it's not looking good, to be honest. Now, I'm going to take a stab at some speculation here and say that realistically what Nacon is hoping for is that this showcase will show that they have things going on, allowing them to hopefully continue business relatively as usual, which will hopefully keep revenue flowing in so they can try to restructure this debt and not completely go out of business. Supposedly, the reason Spiders was closed was that they could not find a buyer for the studio, as they initially wanted to sell it, hoping that they could make money off of that sale for the exact same reason. But obviously it would be hard to find a buyer for Spiders after everything that happened with Greedfall: The Dying World, obviously not doing well due to the situation Nacon was in, which again is kind of a problem of their own making, and it becomes a bit of a vicious cycle. And I'm just not sure how I'm supposed to watch any of that and then have faith in what Nacon is trying to present here. So let's talk a little bit about what they are trying to present. Now, they've got a few things on the horizon as well as games that have just recently released, but the stuff that has just recently released all has more or less the same issue. Things like Greedfall: The Dying World needing patches and things for all the bugs it's got going on, which Spiders never got the chance to do, and I don't know exactly who Nacon intends on paying to do that work if they want to show it off in a showcase like this, which is the same thing for things like Styx, Blades of Greed. But looking forward, they're also supposed to be showing off several of the racing games they have on their calendar, though admittedly I'm not super familiar with things like that. They're also supposed to be showing off Hunter the Reckoning Death Wish, which is an upcoming World of Darkness game that was announced not all that long ago, which unfortunately also kind of coincided with all this insolvency stuff. Now, luckily, they do not own Teon, the developer of that game, which is one of the main things that they're publishing that I'm actually interested in. And in that case, my hope, and what I would be doing if I was Teon at the very least at this point, would be actively searching for another publisher or thinking up plans for the quite likely situation where it is possible that they suddenly don't have a publisher anymore. I would personally be trying to mitigate that risk as much as possible if I were them. They're also supposed to be publishing that upcoming JRPG known as Edge of Memories, which was set to release sometime in 2026 even. No idea how that's going to go for them. So I guess long story short, while I may wind up covering whatever they go over with Hunter the Reckoning, the rest of it is realistically things you have to take with a gigantic grain of salt, because Nacon's ability to actually deliver on any of it is extraordinarily suspect. But speaking specifically on my end, I would say that it's probably good that Nacon is not directly involved with too many games upcoming that I plan on covering outside of Hunter the Reckoning, because again, I would have to give a big disclaimer on exactly that. But to start wrapping it up, honestly, this whole situation is just a gigantic mess, and I think the Nacon Connect in particular is going to be full of mostly useless information, because regardless of whatever you say there, it is highly subject to change at the moment. And while I understand they basically have to have this showcase in some form or fashion, I think announcing it the day after you close an 18-year-old studio due to, in no small part, your own mismanagement is in incredibly poor taste at best. And if you were going to have to do this, I think waiting a bit longer, honestly, maybe shooting for the start of June when all the other announcement shows are anyway, and maybe decoupling the Nacon brand from said show, given the incredibly bad press surrounding it at the moment, might have been the way to do that. Perhaps put the focus on the developers in some of these studios which are being adversely affected. And so, while this certainly, as you would probably have gathered, not a cheery subject by any means, I guess just after seeing Spiders closed immediately followed up by this announcement, I just found myself asking, what are you doing? Who is in charge of the decision making here? Because they're not doing the best job. And so for the foreseeable future, I just have to put Nacon in the I'll believe it when I see it category of news and information, as it's been a pretty shockingly bad few months for them. But that is ultimately pretty much all I had to say for this video. Again, not a cheery subject, which can honestly make for some depressing comments to read when I go through all of them. But obviously, you are more than welcome to comment down below how you feel about all of this. This is not really the type of thing I usually cover, but I do review a ton of games, and so if you're into that, by all means, like, comment, subscribe, and stick around, I suppose. But regardless of all that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.